And welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Interventions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. Okay, so we don't have too much of an update, but we do have from August 15th when the World Food Program declared a official famine in Gaza, warning that death tolls will rise and a lot of food-related injuries and death are going to occur in Gaza if something doesn't dramatically happen, including returning of the hostages and absolute ceasefire, so that and removal of all blockages that Israel or any other government has put in place to stop humanitarian aid. Of course, the return response from Israel on such things are that the reason for the blockages is because that the help is going to the Hamas or Hamas-related organizations and isn't really going to help any of the people, because the Hamas is going to take the aid for themselves and the death tolls will still rise. Honestly, there may not be a lot of credence to be put to that. The Hamas also, Israel also claims that the numbers and of illnesses and injured and humanitarian aid actually needed is rigged by the Hamas, and that the numbers cannot be trusted because all of the numbers are coming from organizations that are either sympathetic to the Hamas or run by the Hamas, which the World Food Program says that the numbers are real and that the conditions are real. And when they released on August 15th a statement, the declaration followed the sharp escalations of conflict, restricted food access, and near total Israeli blockage imposed earlier this year, partially increased in the last months. The IPC report states over 500,000 people will face catastrophic conditions marked by starvation, destitution, and death after 22 months of this conflict. And of course, at that same time, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary-General of the United Nations, called the famine a man-made disaster because it could have been prevented if the humanitarian aid had been allowed to flow freely. One of the other, if you're in Canada, as we are, one of the other hot items is the flight attendants for Air Canada. And while it's going to take a number of days for things to go back to normal and for Air Canada to get through backlogs and whatever after a strike, it would seem that there's still not a release of one of the major things that was sitting on the table was giving the flight attendants pay for work that they do while not in flight. And no one seems to be able to come up with an answer as to why flight attendants are not deserving of pay for work that they do while they're not in flight. It would seem that Well, most of you listening, as an employee, if your boss told you to do something, and he wasn't going to pay you for the time it took to do it, would you not be upset with your employer? Would you not want uh, some sort of compensation for everything that you do for your employer? And why should these flight attendants be any different? Now, granted, this is a podcast and a company that owns this podcast, the copyrights to this podcast are a bunch of human rights activists. With that being said, it is this a case of gender discrimination? And that has yet to be determined also. So good luck to the flight attendants of Air Canada. Hopefully you'll get all of the compensation that you deserve, and fair and equal pay is in order. Let's put it that way. Okay, moving on to it, since we're still in Canada, I'm going to make a comment about a few things that have happened locally. If you're actually in Surrey, British Columbia, or in White Rock, British Columbia, two articles that have come up. Horse racing. Well, okay, why is horse racing a human right? Well, horse racing in of itself is not a human right, but what is a human right is to abruptly, within hours, tell a business owner that they can no longer operate their business, and that an entire racetrack has been shut down in Surrey, British Columbia, in the Cloverdale section of uh, Surrey, BC, because they want to redevelop it. The land was held under a lease for the Fraser Downs racetrack, and that lease was terminated abruptly over the past few days, and they were told that they were shutting down all operations there. The horses had to be removed from the property, and it does cause a hardship, because while a lot of people think that, oh, it's horse racing, they're huge millionaires and everything, most of those millions are actually wrapped up in their animals. And those animals aren't, for the most part, most of the trainers and the owners of these horses, they're beloved friends. Not exactly pets, no, but they are well cared for, and they are valuable to the people who actually own the horses. I also say this because, well, um, I once had a racehorse, and it was a lovely animal, and it was friendly to me, uh, and very affectionate. And after they have spent part of um, their life racing, many of the owners otherwise, they do try to ensure that those horses are turned to places where they can help with mental health, um, that they can help add value back to the community in other ways besides the races themselves. So just to say that, oh, well, you can no longer have your animals here, you're no longer going to be able to race here, is kind of a slight and maybe a bit of a slap in the face. So uh, the redevelopment is going to happen, and there isn't a lot of protesting or anything that is actually being listened to at this point on that. If you live in White Rock, BC, and you're actually listening to this particular podcast, there is a pissed off landowner. It is taking him 8 years to build his home. There's no real explanation as to why it is taking him 8 years to build his home, other than he is claiming delays from City Hall. There's always more questions than answers about why there are such delays from City Hall. And some of it could be the actual plans of the house, which is of the house being built, which is not actually being discussed. But this landowner is calling for a petition, and that petition is actually gaining some steam to make White Rock, BC no longer be some small town by the sea. Its major commerce is tourism, and because they have a beautiful pier that sits at the end of the other town. It is a ocean-fronted town. There aren't really too many bad views if you actually go there to visit, because you have a wonderful inlet to the Pacific Ocean right there, and it is convenient. Also, White Rock, BC, is also very convenient to the U.S. border, and it gets a lot of traffic from Americans. So, the question I have for this particular landowner: is there further development and land acquisition that he is actually trying to get a hold of? That if he was to put it back through the bigger town of Surrey, BC, that he thinks he might get acquisition and get rights for redevelopment of certain pieces of land that might actually destroy the view for all of the people in White Rock, BC, and hurt their tourism. So, why don't we move forward? And we have other things on the book: municipal funding from the federal government for municipalities for climate adoption, or I should say adaptation, in the amounts of $5.5 million to support 70 municipalities' climate adaptation projects across Canada, upgrades and things like that to make cities a little bit better and a little bit more environmental friendly. We're also going to hear again from Premier Scott Moe, as he is talking about the 76% tariff that China is placing on canola oil and canola seeds. It is, well, that's big business for Saskatchewan, Canada. That is one of the major things that they do there. They grow the canola plants that are turned into the canola oil. And how many of us use canola oil for cooking? But there are many other uses, industrial uses for canola oil that China now knows about, and as such, they are placing a 76% tariff against the import of the canola oil and canola seeds. This, well, it would make the product less desirable in China. And Scott Moe, Premier of Saskatchewan, is asking Prime Minister Mark Carney to intervene and step up to China and get them to renegotiate the tariff deal. There is some retaliatory tariffs that Mr. Carney has talked about, and of course the conservatives with Pierre Poilievre is saying that the retaliatory tariffs are a bad idea and that he should find another way of negotiating the tariff away, which, while Pierre Poilievre is talking and criticizing Mark Carney for the retaliatory tariffs, he has no real plan to combat the tariffs himself. So, why don't we move forward and we'll start listening from the World Food Program as they discuss Gaza and famine.